Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching this video. Welcome to day 4 of Selfhood's Writing Room Challenge. I hope you have your beverage with you today. So this one is a slightly meatier one in terms of learning. So if you're new to this Selfhood ecosystem, the way that we do things over here, we have a framework that we apply to most of the things that we create. So whether it's workshops, whether it's workbooks, whether it's emails, and essentially it breaks down into 3 core components. So we learn, we explore / experiment, and we discuss. So a lot of what we've been doing the last few days, I'd say, lean more into the explore element. So giving you the time, the space, the support, the prompts to start exploring what's going on internally, to start exploring and learning more about you and your story and who you are and how you understand yourself. And the experiment piece is potentially when there's nudges or encouragements to maybe try something new. So I'd say the last few days, in terms of just starting to think about your story, starting to write it down, starting to interrogate it, has really been leaning into the explore element. On Sunday, which I'm very excited about, is where we really get to bring the discuss part to life. So it's where you get to be in community, with community. We'll do a bit more of what we've been doing these last few days, but it really is about giving you the space to speak to, learn from, connect with other humans going through their own version of this. So we do that through anonymous sharing, we do that in just bigger group conversations, and we also do that in smaller breakout rooms, which honestly is the thing that I feel like most people love the most, is getting that one-on-one time with 1 or 2 people who may live on the absolute other side of the world to you, but there's just this opportunity for just like human connection, like real honesty, vulnerability, connection. So yeah, it's a bit scary at first, but honestly, everyone that comes out of the workshops, when asked what their favorite part is, it's always that bit. And so today we're really going to be leaning more into the learning piece. So a big component of the work that we do is also sharing some of the science, the psychology, the research, the studies behind why we do what we do. And the disclaimer that I gave on day 1 still applies. So whilst we use research to help us give us a bit of a framework for our own lived experiences or prompt things we may have been going through that we thought was just an us thing, all of it needs to be taken with a grain of salt, and you need to keep coming back to you. And if you're looking for an expert to trust when it comes to you and your identity, the expert's you. But today what we want to do is just teach a little bit more. So something that we are here is very proud, self-proclaimed nerds. And when I say we, I can't really speak for the team, but I will speak for myself. So alongside my studies in self and identity, I'm also qualified in neuro-linguistic programming, hypnotherapy, and something called EFT, which stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, also known as tapping. And that really ties more into kind of the energy of the body. The 2 elements that your head may have got stuck on, the hypnotherapy piece, and no, it isn't the stuff you see on TV where like I'll make someone pretend or think that they're like a headless chicken or anything like that. It is not that. And neuro-linguistic programming applies, but essentially it's understanding and deepening the understanding of the brain and the levels that we have to our brain. So as humans, we like to think we're rational creatures. We like to think that all of the decisions that we make, whether it's what you're wearing today, where to sit, if you get on a bus, what you're going to have for dinner, that we make these really consciously. But in fact, only 5% of the things that we do, the things that we think, of our existence, I guess, is conscious. And the other 95% is what you may have heard to refer to as unconscious or subconscious. They are different, those 2 words, slightly, but they can pretty much be used interchangeably, which is this idea that it's almost like the back door to your brain. Or if you see, we use the iceberg analogy quite a lot in our sessions. So the idea that there's this small piece on the top that you see, and then there's this whole other section below the surface that you don't see. And so our conscious mind is that tiny bit up top, which is the piece that we tend to over-identify with, whereas the vast majority of the stuff under the surface, which actually is what is making up who we are, how we think, how we move, what we say, is largely subconscious, unconscious. Now, let me just check my notes, because this is a one that has notes, because I want to make sure I'm covering everything. So we have the conscious mind, 5%, and the subconscious, unconscious mind, which is 95%. And that unconscious, subconscious runs most of who you are and how you show up. And I mean, it makes sense to some degree, right? Because our brain's purpose is to keep us alive, to make existing easier. And our brain is always going to take the path of least resistance, like the easiest option. And so what happens is over time, we build up this subconscious, unconscious brain so that we don't have to consciously think about everything every single time. Can you imagine if you had to consciously remind yourself to breathe, or remind yourself to pump blood around your body, or every time you came across a table or a chair, you had to consciously figure out what that thing was again? It's why our brain works in terms of groupings and labelings. It's because it's just easier and quicker to exist. And a lot of what comprises that 95% unconscious stemmed and was built and was integrated in childhood. So when we were anywhere between baby to 7 or 8. And the thing is, at that age, we didn't have a critical faculty. So if I was to say to you, elephants can fly, you have an ability in your brain to think critically about what I just said and hopefully be like, no, or prove it, or interesting, like, what do you mean by that? Like, there is the critical piece where you can hear what I'm saying, but there's the ability to block it or disprove it or disagree with it. When we were younger, we hadn't developed that yet, which meant everything we saw, we witnessed, we heard, we experienced came into our brain as fact. So it was unquestioned. We just believed it because we were relying on these other humans for our survival. So the things that our parents said in passing, or our carers said in passing, or our siblings said in passing, or things you read in books or watched on TV or in films, all come in unquestioned. And so that is where a lot of our themes, our lessons, our scripts are hiding. And so in the last few days, when you've been starting to interrogate your story, most of that story is in that 95% unconscious, subconscious. I'm sure for many of you, this is the first time you've actively stopped and thought about your own story and the story you've been telling, the story you've been living, the story you've been creating. It's just been happening, and it's being driven by that stuff that's under the surface. So it's why it's so important to start taking time to stop, look at it, and ask yourself, is this true? Did I decide this? Is this something that's just always been there unquestioned? But if I actually bring it to the light, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make sense, or that doesn't apply to who I am, or actually I fundamentally disagree with that. So beyond the fun, exploring your story, figuring out your character type and the other characters in your story, this is the kind of bigger, meatier, deeper thing, is that we are unknowingly often living out and perpetuating ideas, ideals, values, scripts that we didn't choose, that are just there because they've always been there, because we absorbed it from the people around us. So that is really at the crux what we're doing with this exercise, is actually starting to have a look at that and decide for yourself if that's something that you feel is true for you at this season and this version of your life, right? Hopefully you're still with me. There will be time for questions on Sunday if there's anything that you want to prod at a little bit more. So today is really about that, looking at the themes, looking at the lessons, looking at the scripts that perhaps have already started to come to light over the last few days. But today, the exercise is really about drilling down and focusing on them and figuring out who the other co-authors have been in your story, because unfortunately, up until this point, not all of it has been written by you. So you may want to write this down in terms of there's 3 different types of messaging that I'm going to highlight. And so all of these are internalized messaging. So in many ways, these are the filters that you experience the world. So what you see. And this is the other thing about our brain. So if you think about right now, how many potential things are going on around you. If you think about potentially the sounds that you can hear, the things you can see out of your peripheral vision, how your clothes feel on your skin, how you feel sat on your chair or your sofa or your bed or the floor or wherever you are, there is a lot going on. There is a lot going on. And our brain can only bring in and take in and focus on so many things. So it makes a decision based on a lot of that subconscious, unconscious programming that it will only focus on things that essentially confirm what it already believes to be true. So if you think about all this stuff going on, your brain's got to figure out, okay, what do I focus on? What feels valuable? What shall I bring in and internalize? And it's just going to repeat things you already believe to be true, because our brain doesn't want something coming in that's going to confuse us and create some kind of cognitive dissonance. So it's why if you have a belief or a theme that nobody likes you, say experiences have happened, things you've heard, things you've witnessed, a story has formed that people don't like you. That means that your brain, if you're in a situation and there's a million things going on, and there's actually some things going on that could disprove that. So actually there's experiences where it's showing people 100% do like you. They do want to be friends with you. They do value you. But there's also one experience that could reinforce that belief that you have, that story that you have, that people don't like you. Your brain is going to focus on that and pull that information in. And it's why 2 people can be in the exact same room and pick up on 2 very different things, and neither one of them be wrong. But it's if you already believe this to be true, that's the thing your brain's going to focus on. And if the other person believes this to be true, that's the thing your brain's going to focus on. So again, it's this idea that when we talk about our story, not only is our story reflecting our lived experience, but you can see how it also starts to shape it. So these are some, messaging, internal things to start thinking about, to start looking for in your story. And these are the things where I said, if you have pen, paper, or your phone or whatever, start to write these different types down, because then the exercise for today is actually going to be going back to your story and looking for these things in them. So the first one is themes. So these are kind of the broader, more vague, I think of it as energy. So it's things like resilience could be a theme. So maybe in a number of different parts of your story or in stories, there is this idea that challenges happen, bad things happen to you, but you overcome them, you keep going. There's this resilience, there's this theme of resilience in your romantic stories, in your family stories, in your professional stories, this idea that hard things happen, but you keep going. The opposite of that is that there could be a theme of helplessness or unlucky. So this idea that in numerous parts of your life or in numerous stories of your life, there's experiences that have reinforced this idea that you are unlucky. And that's a theme that kind of just carries out through the overarching story and potentially shows up in some of the sub-stories as well. So again, when we talk about filters, and I can't remember which day it was, I think maybe day 2 was it, that we were talking about over rehearsal. These are those kinds of things where perhaps it's happened a few times, and so it kind of just becomes this fact that you're like, oh, I'm an unlucky person, categorically, full stop. When actually, when you interrogate that, are you an unlucky person, or have you just had moments where unlucky things have happened to you? And every time you tell yourself, I'm an unlucky person, I'm an unlucky person, you're reinforcing that, you're over rehearsing that, and that's what your brain is going to focus on and bring in. So themes are kind of those more broad, abstract themes that run through your stories. Getting a little bit more granular, second pillar is lessons. So these are a little bit more detailed, a little bit more specific. So the example I wrote down here was a lesson might be whenever good things start to happen, something always goes wrong. So this might be something you've learned through, again, your own experiences, Or it could be something you've learned through the experiences of parents or carers or family members or friends. It could be somebody else's story. So it could be a parent's story, but you've just had it continually projected onto you. You've grown up around them saying like, oh, things are too good to be true. Something bad's about to happen. Something's around the corner. And this belief specifically ties to a really interesting book, which, what is it called? Essentially, it's about the upper limit, though. You may know what I'm talking about. We'll put it in the notes, which is all about this idea and this belief that many of us have, that we have an upper limit of how much joy, how much success, how much freedom we can experience. And once we hit that upper limit, we start to self-sabotage. Something goes wrong. Like whether it's you start training and you start exercising and you're doing really well and you're beating your personal best, and then all of a sudden there's an injury. And it's almost like our brain hits this point of like, I don't know how to be this happy. I don't know how to be this successful. So I'm going to do something that means that I pull myself down to a level that feels more comfortable. Even if rationally that doesn't make sense to you, subconsciously that's what feels safe to you. So lessons are those kind of more detailed things. Another lesson could be, I can't let people get too close, or people can't be trusted. These are the kinds of lessons that we learn through our own experiences or through witnessing the experiences of others. And it's not to say that at some point they might not have been true, but I think what's important is for you to look at them now at this stage, this version of you, thinking about the life that you want to lead, and ask if that lesson is going to serve you. If that belief, that categorical belief that people cannot be trusted, is that true? And will that serve you? Is all I want you to think about. And then finally, we've got scripts. So these are the scripts. You know, I've talked about ideologies. I talked about the fact that we aren't the only authors of our story. We have co-authors, and ideologies, society, culture. This is where these scripts come in. So these are these ideals that kind of become ingrained as just fact, as just a thing that you do. And these scripts will vary depending on the culture and the society and the community that you grow up in. But within the Western world, scripts will be things like you have to go to school, you have to get a degree, you get married, you want kids, you want a stable job, all these things that for a lot of our life we may have just believed, we may have not questioned, we just think this is what's right. But again, is it? Because everything that exists right now, everything you use, everything you believe, it came from somewhere. It was imagined up by somewhere. And I was on an amazing course run by a wonderful company called New Room the other day, and I was reminded of this really powerful quote, and I'm going to read it out. And the question is to ask yourself, whose imagination are you living in? So those scripts, those beliefs that you have to have a stable job, you have to go to school, you have to find one partner to settle down with, ask yourself who decided that. Did you decide that, or did it come from somewhere else? And if it came from someone else, who is that someone else? And why is it that that's something that they want you to believe? And I'm not encouraging you to not believe or believe. I'm just asking you to ask the question, to start interrogating some of these things that we just blindly believe to be true, build our life around, build our story around, and never stop to ask ourselves if this is actually what feels true to me, and if this is the life that I want to lead, and if this is the imagination that I want to live inside of. Cool. So those are the three things. We've got themes, the overarching broader pieces. We've got lessons, so something that we've learned through an experience that happened to us or an experience that happened to somebody else. And then we have scripts, and these are the more societal, cultural things that are just built into how we think we need to live our life and exist. Cool. So before I get to the exercise, which really is just going to be going over your story and starting to explore and uncover and find some of these, I just want to remind you to be kind to yourself with this. Please don't shame yourself if you start to uncover things that you believe or scripts that you followed or themes that you have and actually they don't feel like they align with who you are now. That makes sense. Because up until this point, a lot of our story has been written by others and we've just been going along with it. And so just with all of this work, please be kind. This isn't about shaming yourself or past versions of yourself or decisions you made or things you believed. This really is about giving yourself the space to just start exploring and experimenting with those lessons and experimenting with those themes and trying something else on if the things that have previously been there are no longer working for you. And there's power in just being aware. You don't need to do anything right now. Even just sitting, looking at your story, starting to uncover some of these lessons, these messages, and being aware of them is more than enough. Okay, so that is the exercise for today. You could set an alarm again if you find that helps you stay consistent and motivated, especially when your brain is going to be telling you to not do this. Because again, essentially you're kind of shaking things up in there. The brain is happy with how things have been going, what you've been thinking. So there is likely to be some internal pushback, but just keep going with it. So spend as much time as you have to just start looking back at your story, looking back at some of those themes, seeing what some of those lessons are that perhaps have been lying there under the surface, and some of the scripts that you may have just been following without actually questioning where they came from and if they feel right for you. So I will see you tomorrow for day 5, so our last email video. Yeah, I think that's everything. So have a great day.